Good evening, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Scotland at 7 with myself, Gordon Ross, and my guest this evening, Dave Tucker, our Rural Affairs correspondent, helping me to dissect the news this evening. Now, it's been a big day in Westminster as the SNP opposes the damaging Brexit bill. In the House of Commons today, the European Union Withdrawal Agreement Bill passed its third reading by 330 to 231 after an SNP motion calling on Parliament to reject the third reading was defeated by 329 to 62, with the Labour Party abstaining on the SNP motion. Now, we also have, I believe, we have some video, I believe, of Ian Blackford in his response today. Should be coming up any moment now.
Just point of order, Mr. Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. This is a historic moment for all of us. And of course, we must reflect on the fact that this is the first time that a part of the Union, a country of the Union, is having something done to it which it resents. The Scottish Government and the SNP have made it clear over the course of the last 3.5 years that we were seeking to compromise, that we were seeking to make sure that what the people of Scotland voted for, which was staying within the European Union, that our rights as EU citizens was to be respected. Madam Deputy Speaker, it was interesting that when the Minister was summing up today, that he made no reference to the powerful speeches that had been made by my colleagues about that desire for our rights to be respected, and that we do not consent under any circumstances to the people of Scotland and our country being taken out of the European Union against our will, because let's make no mistake, that's exactly as to what is happening. And of course, Madam Deputy Speaker, yesterday the Scottish Parliament voted overwhelmingly not to give its consent. Madam Deputy Speaker, this is a constitutional crisis, because we will not and we cannot accept what has been done to us. And I say to the Prime Minister, and I say to the Government, respect the election.
That wasn't me saying sit down. The Honourable Gentleman can finish his point.
For God's sake.
Briefly.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, but this is an important point. In the election that we held last December, the people of Scotland stood by the Scottish National Party on the basis of our right to choose. We will not accept being taken out of the European Union, and I say to the Prime Minister, respect democracy, respect the election results, respect the right of the people of Scotland to choose our future. We will have our referendum, Prime Minister, and Scotland will remain an independent Europe.
Well, I think you can see there, Dave, that Ian Blackford was in no mood for compromise today. I think that's one of the most barnstorming speeches that I've heard him make. What's your reaction to this latest development, Dave? How do you think things are going with the SNP in London at the moment? Are they performing the way you would hope?
Well, yes, they're so limited in what they can do, which is so frustrating. But it obviously makes me absolutely furious to see the disdain with which they are treated in Parliament by the opposition. Well, not the opposition, by the government, the Tory party. And I know that I listened to some of the speeches yesterday from our own MPs, and I was very impressed with all of them.
I think Joanna Cherry stood out.
She was
very
amazing.
much for me anyway when I listened to her speech yesterday.
Yes.
Mike Russell, the Scottish Minister for Constitutional Affairs, has been in London today as well, and he's spoken out and said, I'll quote here, "I made it clear today that we expect the UK government to respect the right of the people of Scotland to choose their own future. We have a clear democratic mandate to offer people a choice on that future in an independence referendum, and the result of December's general election has only strengthened that right." So it seems they're hardening in tone now from the SNP, no more Mr. and Mrs. Nice person, it seems. appears to me, at least, to be a little bit of a turning point politically. It sounds like a line, well, looks a bit like a line has been drawn in the sand now by the SNP.
Yes. Well, I do hope so. I mean, they've been so patient for so long since the vote came out, offering the compromise, you know, behaving like adults. To the, you know, all we got from the others is baying.
Yeah. And we heard the rudeness there as well, somebody shouting, sit down.
Yes.
I mean, to do that to the leader of an opposition party is so rude.
Yes.
I'll go on a little bit more from Mr. Russell. He says it's in the best interests of Scotland to remain in the European single market and the customs union to safeguard jobs and provide guarantees on workers' rights and the environmental standards. And therefore, we will be pressing to be as closely aligned to the EU as possible in the future. In order to limit the damaging impact of Brexit on Scotland, it's now imperative that the Scottish Government is given a proper and meaningful role in the next phase of negotiations. Mike Russell here basically demanding that Scotland's politicians are given a proper role in the negotiations with the European Union.
Should be heard, which hasn't happened right from the get-go.
Indeed. So do you feel that there's any chance at all, any realistic chance that the Conservatives are going to listen to this?
No.
You think they're going to dig in their heels?
Yes.
So
they've got the 80 extra
yeah,
votes.
they've already proved today that they've managed to get a majority of over 100 in one case to vote them down. According to Mr. Russell, he says, where are we? Just going back to this. He said it's vital that devolution is protected throughout the process and that there is a clear recognition that the Scottish Parliament has now overwhelmingly rejected the withdrawal agreement bill. So this is a clear statement, I believe, from not just the SNP, but from the entire Scottish Parliament.
Apart from the usual suspects.
Well, apart from the Conservative and Unionist Party, who will go along, obviously, with whatever the government says.
Yes.
But the rest of Scotland is saying no to leaving the European Union, saying it pretty loudly, it seems. I think, and it's my own personal interpretation of this, that there is a change coming. There's a change in tone, and there's a very clear change in the demeanour of Ian Blackford, particularly, I think. Very combative stance he struck today.
Yes.
Now, that brings us to European Union now. The EU is warning of the danger of the Tory transition period deadline. Obviously, it's a very short deadline, so it's only 11 months. A comprehensive agreement on the future relationship between the European Union and Britain will take longer than the 11-month transition period that begins when the UK leaves the EU on January 31st, the EU's chief negotiator said today. We're ready to do our best and do the maximum in the 11 months to secure a basic agreement with the UK. And this is an interesting
basic agreement.
An interesting turn of phrase.
Yes.
A basic deal. So we're looking at maybe something that's very stripped out, simplistic.
Yes.
Perhaps just in, we don't know what the detail of this might be. So the EU's Brexit negotiator, Michel Barnier, has been speaking at a speech in Stockholm. So he obviously believes that 11 months is just too short.
Yes.
And what he's hinting at here, I believe, is that what will be achieved in that 11 months will be minimal.
Yes.
But what on earth can be
brings
achieved
you
in
back
11 months?
to wonder why Boris Johnson did a Theresa May and blocked himself in with this short time scale, the way she did.
Painted himself into another corner.
Right into a corner. So what's behind that?
I believe, I'm paraphrasing, that the strategy of the Conservative Party is again to threaten the EU with a short deadline or the possibility of a no-deal Brexit, which they believe is going to scare the European Union, but which we know is going to damage Britain far more than it will damage the EU.
Definitely.
People have characterised this as rushing up to somebody and saying, do what I want or I'm going to shoot myself. It is a threat to self-harm, it seems. Anyway, the European Union don't seem to be terribly impressed by this. And Mr. Barnier said the extremely tight timetable meant the EU would have to prioritise. First, it will be building a new capacity to work together with Britain, both bilaterally and in global institutions, to address issues such as climate change and peace in the Middle East. So the first thing the European Union is looking for here is some kind of harmonisation or agreement on foreign policy.
Yes.
Now that is something which the UK and the EU have very rarely seen eye to eye on.
That's right.
And typically we know that the UK has very often allied itself with America.
Yes.
America has acted, Britain has
Yes.
jumped straight in.
Yes.
The European Union,
Yeah.
more reluctant to do so.
That's right. You could characterise the US and the UK as warmongers. I don't think you could characterise the EU as that.
No, indeed you couldn't. And I think in the case of Germany particularly, since World War II, Germany has been limited in the defensive capabilities that it's allowed to both develop and deploy since World War II.
Yes.
Finally, I'm just going to read through a little bit more of what Mr. Barnier has said. Now, he mentioned climate change in the Middle East in this first tranche of things that they want to discuss. He says the second point is that we need to build a very close security relationship.
Yeah.
Now, this is again a top priority for a country, as you've described it, which is a bit of a warmonger, which is attracting terrorism to itself.
Yes.
So security is going to be very important here. And I would imagine Boris Johnson, despite the rhetoric, the anti-European rhetoric, will want to maintain these connections, these intelligence and security connections.
Well, yes. But, you know, I'm suspicious that the dark things that go on under the table with the government and their security, you know, they're stirring pots.
Do you believe they're antagonising people a little bit as well as...
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's not... you have to ask, why is Britain a hotbed of producing terrorists?
Indeed.
How is it allowed? Are our security services so inept that this has been allowed to happen? Or is there another force going on there that is actually nurturing these and putting them out?
You're postulating the idea that some of this terrorism is in a kind of false flag manufactured threat, something to keep us scared so that we don't ask too many questions. Maybe.
Well, that's right.
It's something I have heard other people say. I'm not sure whether it's true or not. Of course, these are opinions.
Yeah.
The final point from Mr. Barnier said that the EU would insist that a future economic partnership is based on a level playing field in regulations, tax and other matters. This to me rang alarm bells because...
Other matters?
Well, the main reason this rang alarm bells for me is the mention of taxation. And the fact that the European Union has already brought in antitrust laws to prevent tax evasion. The UK is very much against that.
Right.
So one of the things that this throws up, let's see, the level playing field day, what does that mean to you as a person from a farming background? Is that just to play fair with other...
Well, yeah, certainly in farming terms, it's a level playing field is where all the different farming units are given the same sort of support.
And this was what the Common Agricultural Policy was meant to achieve.
Well, they have been changing it. You know, the ones that have got a high amount of subsidies, their subsidy has been coming down each year since 2014. And those that have got a very low subsidy have been coming up to meet them since 2014. And by 2020, it was supposed to have levelled out. I mean, that harks back to the fact that Scotland was given this big amount of money from the EU, or they attracted that. But it doesn't come to us. It goes to the member state, which was the UK, who then redistributed it and made the unlevel playing field even more unlevel.
What's the situation at the moment in terms of Scotland? Is the playing field level for our farmers at the moment?
No.
Why not, do you think? What's happening? Is it because we're not receiving the funding that we should be getting because the UK is not passing it on?
I don't think it's that. The member state has the final say on how the money is distributed, but then the regions are able, or what are the devolved governments, they decide on what measures they're going to use, which could be applicable. Like, for instance, Scotland has got a completely different demographic and geography from England.
Yes.
So naturally, we're going to spend our money in a different way
Maybe
to
more
support our farmers.
Maybe more on the marginal farmers and the upland farmers who need that extra
yes,
assistance.
if that's their policy. And I think it is. I think it always has been to support them. But then you've got NFUS who've been fighting and saying, well, it's the ones that are producing that need the support. And it's been a very tricky balance for any minister, in probably in Wales as well.
And the European Union has said, Michel Barnier has said that they're looking for a level playing field in terms of taxation and business.
Yeah, corporation tax?
Well, yes, corporation tax is obviously something which is important to anybody who runs a business, particularly a limited company.
Yeah, yeah.
How does that affect the farming community? Is there corporation tax, or is it mostly income tax?
It's not a topic that I've ever heard discussed in farming circles, corporation tax.
Because it's mostly small.
Well, yeah. Even the big ones, they're not operating
Small to
corporation
medium-sized
tax.
industries,
Yes.
always.
Yes. You see, we've got so much land that is marginal, but there's masses of acres of it to one holding. And it makes them look like a big farmer because they've got 10,000 acres or even 50,000 acres. But it's all very poor, unproductive ground. And you can't compare that with, for instance, when we went on our Erasmus trip, one of the young farmers that we met in France, he worked in a partnership with 5 other farmers, and between the 5 of them, they farmed 10,000 acres.
So they were
fabulous
a
ground.
gigantic collective, really.
It is. And one of the interesting things was, which doesn't happen in Scotland very much, we said, you know, how do you get on? I mean, do you not fight? You know, and who drives the combine? Oh, we never touch the combine. That's his no, it's one of the farmers who has expertise in the combine and in the arable side, and then his was the dairy, so he did all the dairy side. And he said, we just don't fight because, you know.
Okay, so you've learned some lessons from your trip to France.
Yes.
Well, according to Mr. Barnier, he says if the UK wants an open link with us for products, zero tariffs, zero quota, we need to be careful about what we call zero dumping. Now, I'm not quite sure what this is.
Like steel from China?
Is it cheap products and cheap labour being dropped into the market?
Yeah.
Which is obviously counter.
Yes, it unbalances the market. You get market failures then, which is what happened with the steel industry, and which led mainly, from what I hear, the Welsh to vote for Brexit.
Well, I remember, can't remember whether it was Boris Johnson or Mrs May saying that one of the reasons that they wanted to leave the EU was so they could diverge their policies away from the EU policies. But what Mr Barnier is saying here is that if they don't follow the rules, and he says here, if this is not the case, then the level of access for British products will be proportionate.
Yes.
Now that's a hint to say that your stuff is going to not get through if you behave in this way.
That's right.
So the EU has said many times that they don't want a competitor on their doorstep.
No.
They want a friend. And of course, if they may change the laws in the UK to allow a vast influx of American-produced food, that's going to hit Scottish farmers, but it's also going to hit the European Union's imports.
Yes, well, that's right.
I'm just going to follow through with this now. Responding to Michel Barnier's remarks that the UK government's transition period deadline doesn't leave enough time to secure a full trade deal, Dr Philippa Watford MP, Dr Philippa Whitford. I always get it as Watford for some reason, sorry. Philippa Whitford MP, the SNP's Shadow Secretary of State for exiting the EU, has said once again the UK government's dangerous move to rule out extending the transition period is laid bare. The EU's chief negotiator has again warned that the Tories' timetable is unrealistic and a comprehensive agreement on the future relationship between the UK and the EU will take longer than 11 months, contradicting Boris Johnson's election pledge and increasing the threat of a devastating no-deal Brexit. with the Tory government refusing to publish an impact assessment on the Brexit deal, and instead intent on ramming its withdrawal agreement through Parliament, it's clear that it will be our economy and people's jobs and living standards and businesses that will pay the price. Scotland must not be dragged to the Brexit cliff edge. It's clear that the people of Scotland must have the choice of a better future as an independent country rather than the Brexit Britain being imposed upon us. So again, Philippa Whitford, also in a combative mood here, complete change of tone from previous statements, where we've heard these phrases over and over again, being dragged out of the EU against our will, and it coming to a crux, coming to a sticking point. And according to Ian Blackford today, we've reached that crisis.
Yes.
Now,
yes.
the question is, what's going to happen next? Who is going to blink first? And I don't know what the answer to this is. Have you any idea? What do you think the SNP perhaps has up its sleeve next?
I'd like to think that they do have something up their sleeve. Because when you look at the number of MPs that we've got who are actually lawyers, and MSPs who are actually lawyers, and on the one hand, people will say, oh, well, that's why they're being so cautious. But equally, let's hope that they're using their brains to look at ways to counter what is happening with us being dragged out, because there must be something way back in the deeds and all the stuff that was agreed
hundreds of years ago.
Hundreds of years, and even as recently as the Edinburgh Agreement and stuff like that.
I have heard people say that when it comes down to this sort of butting of heads between the UK government and the Scottish government, that at the end of the day, the issue of the right to have this referendum, legally speaking, will be based on the recognition of Scotland as a nation and having the right to self-determination under international law. And the hint that I got from that was that perhaps that if the Conservatives refused a Section 30 order and ignored all pleas to have an agreement, then Scotland would still have a referendum. It would still be legal in terms of Scottish law. And then there would be a court battle fought through the higher and higher courts to decide whether Scotland as a country has the right to do this. So I can't see any other potential route other than this legal one at the moment, unless there is something we're missing.
But the other aspect of it is that when the Treaty of Union was signed up, it was to be an agreement between partners. And there is no partnership. I mean, you can see that in the way that not just us, but the Welsh government
have been run
over, or the Welsh Assembly. They're still just an assembly.
We're still waiting to know what our budget is. We don't even know that. We're being told, actually, that the last I heard, the budget will be set on the 11th of April.
Right.
Which I believe is actually the day on which councils in Scotland are required to publish their
for me that's the more concerning thing, that councils have been put in a very tricky situation.
Do you think perhaps that this is an effort by the Conservatives to prevent the Holyrood Parliament from debating this settlement, the so-called Barnett Formula settlement, so that they can then just simply give the money directly to these councils? Using this new hub in Edinburgh that was set up by Mr.
That's
Riddell.
a possibility, yes.
Possibility?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's a possibility.
Okay, all this is obviously speculation on my part, but it seems
Is that
suspicious.
legal?
Sorry?
Is that legal?
To do, for the British
To
government
hand it straight to the local authority?
Boris Johnson has made a statement about this in the past where he threatened to do so. I'm not sure whether it's legal or not.
Right.
Anyway, to move on to our next story today, I'm afraid the Tories have been slammed over the grim reality of the growing food bank crisis. New research by A Menu for Change and the Independent Food Aid Network has revealed claims for emergency food from the Trussell Trust and independent food banks has increased by 22% over an 18-month period. The SNP has called on the Tory government to wake up to the crisis of growing food bank use, as it was revealed that almost 600,000 food parcels were handed out in Scotland over the last 18 months. Charities have slammed Westminster cuts, with data revealing that between April 2018 and September 2019, 278,258 emergency food parcels were distributed by independent food banks in Scotland, with a further 318,214 parcels distributed by the Trussell Trust. A group of frontline organisations, including Oxfam Scotland and the Child Poverty Action Group, is now calling on the UK government to remove the unfair two-child limit and the benefit cap, to increase the national living wage, uprate all benefits in line with inflation, and ban zero-hours contracts, all measures which are backed by SNP MPs. This is in stark contrast to Westminster austerity. The SNP government has been working to develop a social security system with dignity and fairness at its heart, introducing a raft of benefits to provide much needed financial support to low-income families, including a brand new benefit which will provide eligible families with £10 a week for every child under 16 by 2022. So this sounds like the Scotland's government doing its day job here,
Yes.
And responding to the crisis straight away, it seems.
But I think it always has. It's just if you listen to the very powerful rhetoric that comes out of the media, the unionist-backed media, you would think that they're not doing anything. And if you listen to Prime Minister's questions, you're told that they're not doing anything.
Yeah, and you wouldn't know because a lot of it is omitted in mainstream media.
Absolutely.
Shona Robeson, MSP, today said that while food banks do an excellent job of providing support to those who need it, in fact, the fact that they even exist is a damning indictment of Tory policies, which are actively driving people into desperate situations. The blame for this national scandal lies solely with the Tory party, and the grim reality of cuts to benefits, delayed social security payments, and placing sanctions on vulnerable people at every opportunity. Time and again, the SNP has attempted to restore the safety net of social security. But with the majority of welfare spending still firmly in the hands of right-wing Tories, it is up to the UK government to urgently reverse the damage done to the most disadvantaged in Scotland. The Tory government needs to wake up to the cost of this crisis and stop shunning responsibility before more families and children are pushed into poverty. Now, the Green MSP, Alison Johnson, has also commented on this crisis. She says this meteoric rise in the need for emergency food in Scotland must be a source of great shame for this wealthy, food-rich country. In just 18 months, food bank use has increased by more than a fifth, which is completely unacceptable in the 21st century. There's no doubt that food insecurity comes from income insecurity.
Yes.
And there's more than enough food, but people don't have enough money to buy it. And that's why the Scottish Greens demand a welfare system and employment laws based on dignity and human rights. And that means the Scottish Government must recognise the current approach is not working and embed the right to food into law, as was promised in the Good Food Nation Bill proposals. Now, this is also time to improve our safety net, and I'd encourage the government to look at progressing the trials of a universal basic income. So we're getting a different approach from the Greens, a slightly different approach, saying that they would like the SNP to do more to mitigate these problems. But I have to admit, I had not heard of the Good Food Nation Bill proposals.
Yes.
Have you heard of this?
Well, the Good Food Nation, was that not one of Richard Lochhead's?
It might well be. I hear
working with Pete Ritchie.
I'm hearing that Fergus Ewing was involved.
Yes, because Richard he started out to look at the land that we've got and the food that we're producing and try and improve the food that we're eating. So he bumped up the amount of grants that he was giving to RET, which is Royal Highland Education Trust. And they go into schools. Ordinary farmers like myself will go in and we'll talk to the children about their food and where it comes from, etc., etc. And that has been incredibly successful over the last decade. where children really particularly in the primary schools, we're still struggling to get into the secondary schools though.
But to convince children of the need for
the
good
teachers
quality
mainly, to convince the teachers, because
so
they're the ones that really are needing
trying to
educated.
get the educators switched on as well.
Yes, absolutely. Can I just say, one of the
Yes.
things that Richard did was he tried to ensure that by the time a primary 7 left primary school, they were able to make their own pot of soup.
Interesting. Something which our grandmothers used to teach us.
Absolutely, yes, yes.
Yeah, and it's now the remit of Fergus Ewing as the minister.
And he's
in charge.
continuing that on. And so you can imagine these kids coming out from school, they will be going home to some parents who haven't a clue how to do that. And they'll be teaching the parents.
I get the point of what the Green MSP was saying about food insecurity is actually only caused by income insecurity, lack of money. It's plain and simple. The food is abundant.
Yeah, it is. And being wasted.
Yeah,
And
because people don't have
one
enough
of the
money
things that I would like to see happening is better coordination between the supermarkets for all the food that has got that sell-by date
just coming
gone.
up to the end of its shelf.
Yes, and
display life.
And how many? I know some of them are, but how couldn't we improve that even more to make sure that that food isn't left there for the likes of myself, who's very guilty of going along and buying something that's been reduced to 20p or whatever.
Sometimes.
You know, and I feel guilty doing it, but I think, well, why is this not going to people who really genuinely need it?
Maybe there should be a delivery service like they
Yes.
already do. Anyway, that's something that might be suggested later.
Yes. Can I just mention one more thing that I
One more thing,
discovered?
but very briefly.
Yes, there is a shop near Knightswood somewhere, I think, that has started this, and they're taking that kind of food from Marks and Spencer's and places like that, and as long as you're working in public service, you can get a card and go there and buy this food at cut price.
Fascinating. Well,
so it's starting, but we need to expand it more.
Well, we need to move on here again, I'm afraid. So we're now... Hang on, let's find my script. We're talking about Clive Lewis backs Scotland's right to hold an independence referendum. Now, the SNP has welcomed Labour leadership candidate Clive Lewis MP's support for Scotland's right to hold an independence referendum. Writing in The National, he said, "It's little wonder that so many now support independence, and given the prospect of at least 5 years of Tory rule imposing a Brexit on Scotland that it didn't vote for, the question of independence and a second referendum is unavoidable. There should be no question of Labour opposing a second independence referendum." Now, this is a remarkable
Jess
statement.
Phillips?
Well, yes, it seems that the Labour hopefuls are lining up to be either in favour of or against another referendum.
Well, she's certainly drawn the ire of a lot of Twitter yes supporters.
This gentleman, Clive Lewis, actually, the MP, is relatively unknown, I think, to most of us.
I was going to say, you know, I'm ashamed to say, I kind of have heard the name, but I wanted to say to you, well, who is he?
Well, that's the thing. Nobody seems to know. The Labour Shadow Financial Secretary to the Treasury is the latest senior figure since the SNP's landslide general election to say that Labour should not seek to block a referendum. So that's obviously who this chap is. He's the Shadow Financial Secretary to the Treasury. In December, Labour's MSPs Neil Findlay and Monica Lennon, former Labour MPs Ged Kellan and Paul Sweeney, and former Labour Cabinet Secretary Malcolm Chisholm, and the current president of COSLA and leader of the Labour group in Aberdeenshire Council, Alison Evison, all voiced support for Scotland's right to hold an independence referendum. Now, this is something, to me at least, that a politician should be able to support.
Yes.
They're not saying they want independence, that we should have independence. They're saying we should have the right, to vote upon it. And that, to me, I think, is a bit of a change in the rhetoric coming from the Labour Party.
Yes.
Is it, do you think, going to bode well for whomever becomes the new Labour leader? Will we see a pro-independence Labour leader, do you think?
Well, if you listen to Jess Phillips, and she's an example, I think probably not. I mean, Clive Lewis seems to be out on the wing here.
So you believe Clive is kind of a lone voice in this?
I fear so. I mean, have you heard any of the others?
Not to my knowledge. No, this is the first one that I've seen. Now, commenting on this, the SNP's Deputy Leader, Kirsty Blackman MP, has said the SNP government has a cast iron democratic mandate to hold an independence referendum. It's stronger than any mandate Boris Johnson has to impose Brexit. The UK government must respect that. It's welcome that a growing number of senior Labour figures are recognising that mandate and respecting Scotland's right to choose our own future. So again, we're starting to see little steps forward, little steps towards this independence referendum from the opposition parties in Scottish politics. The question now is, will the Labour Party in England take the same steps? You know, will they come forward and start to say that the Scottish Labour Party will be autonomous and will be able to back independence, or oppose it if they wish? It could be an issue of conscience, I guess, like a free vote it might be.
Yes. Well, I mean, I just find it bizarre that a party founded by, was it Keir Hardie? Can you imagine Keir Hardie saying, no, you can't have it? You know, I mean, it's beyond.
Well, it's I guess it's up to the English Labour Party to decide this.
But how far have they come from the values of Keir Hardie and Campbell Bannerman?
Well, if you speak to any socialist in Scotland, they'll tell you just how far to the right the Labour Party has moved. Now, it says also here, we're still talking about what Kirsty Blackman has been saying. She said that if frontbench spokesmen like Clive Lewis can respect Scotland's right to self-determination and understand why so many people are moving to support independence, there is no democratic reason why the UK government should attempt to block a referendum. While we will not all agree on independence, it's clear that Scotland's future must be in Scotland's hands, not Boris Johnson's. Again, this messaging that Scotland is a nation that must decide for itself and not have decisions made for it. We're not children, in other words, I guess, that is coming down to. Now, I'd like to leave this subject and move on now to matters that have occurred in the Ukraine. Now, US intelligence has suggested that the Ukrainian International Airlines Boeing 737, which crashed recently, was hit by an Iranian missile. Now,
well, they would say that.
Yes, I was going to say something similar there. Western security officials believe the Ukrainian passenger jet that crashed shortly after takeoff from Tehran airport in Iran on Wednesday was accidentally shot down by an Iranian anti-aircraft missile. US intelligence suggests that the plane was hit by an Iranian air defense missile. Officials told the US media that they had identified the signature of an Iranian anti-aircraft missile battery being activated shortly before the aircraft crashed into countryside southwest of the Iranian capital, killing all 176 on board. Suspicions that the aircraft may have accidentally been shot down had grown throughout Thursday. The London-based firm IHS Markit, a private intelligence firm, concluded it was likely hit by a surface-to-air missile, and that two US media outlets reported that the government sources had made the same assessment. It assessed that Ukraine International Airlines Boeing 737-800 was likely to have been shot down mistakenly by an IRGC-operated SA-15 missile. It cited images circulating on social media showing a Russian-made missile that was purportedly photographed near the site of the crash. It could not confirm the authenticity of the image, but it said it assessed it to be credible. The Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, has called for a full investigation into the crash and reports that it could have been caused by something such as a stray missile following a telephone conversation with the Ukrainian president. In the phone call, Johnson offered his condolences, offered UK support, and was updated on the crash. A Number 10 spokesman has said. The Prime Minister said that there needed to be a full, credible and transparent investigation into what had happened. Asked whether this meant the UK was concerned about the possible cause of the crash, he said, "I'm not going to speculate on this, but the reports we have seen are very concerning and we're urgently looking into them." The Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said earlier on Thursday that his government was considering several possibilities, but asked people to refrain from speculating about the crash. Iranian authorities have blamed mechanical issues, which they say happened shortly after the plane left Tehran's main airport, at 6:15 a.m. on Wednesday. Kiev has said its investigators wanted to search the site of Wednesday's crash southwest of Tehran for possible debris of a Russian-made missile used by Iran's military. The Iranian report cited witnesses on the ground and in a passing aircraft flying at high altitude as saying that the plane was on fire when in the air. Canadian security sources said that there was evidence that one of the engines had overheated. The crash happened hours after Iran launched missile attacks on the US-led forces in Iraq, leading to some to speculate that the plane may have been hit. So there's an awful lot of speculation going on here, but the Americans claim to have evidence.
So were the Iranians supposedly firing from Iran into Iraq?
No, this aircraft crashed inside Iran.
Uh-huh.
They were, I beg your pardon, they were firing missiles at Iraq from Iran.
Right.
But the missile that hit the plane was not, apparently, according to the Americans, a long-range missile. It was a ground-to-air missile, so it was a fairly short-range, small missile.
Russian-made.
But these at the moment are allegations that are being made. Just
speculation.
We can't even confirm them just now.
No.
So it's an air defense missile, and sometimes these systems can be activated if a plane flies through an area it's not supposed to be in.
Yes. And they think it's a fighter jet, like the Americans did when they shot down the Iranian one.
Indeed, and this is a strange symmetry to this situation, is it not? Because the Americans did actually deliberately shoot down an airliner once. However, this aircraft was much lower, and it was shot down by an anti-aircraft missile specifically for bringing down aircraft.
Right.
So if this has actually happened, then this is a major tragedy for Iranians and for Ukrainians who might have been on the plane. I believe there were 3 Britons on that aircraft as well.
Yes.
Yeah, so the allegations that have been shot down by this missile, whether accidentally or not, if it was a missile, the Americans are the ones making the allegations, apparently, and backed up by other intelligence agencies that they are allied with. So it remains to be seen. The West is making this allegation. So it could be political. We don't know.
Yeah, and of course the Americans are so well known for
being accurate. The black
boxes
have been recovered, and they believe that the information in them is largely intact, so they will tell the story.
But who's in charge of them?
I believe that will be the Iranian authorities will be doing the accident investigation. So there is a risk, if it was a missile from them, that it might be covered up. But on the other hand, why would they shoot down a plane just after it taken off from their own airport? It makes very little sense. Okay. Anyway, we're moving now to France, and the French unions are engaged in a battle with Mr. Macron, the president, in a make-or-break pension protest. The French trade unions disrupted rail services, cut the power output, and brought demonstrators onto the streets and cities across France on Thursday in a make-or-break push to force President Emmanuel Macron to abandon his planned pension reform. Tear gas swirled in Paris when riot police charged the demonstrators, who hurled projectiles and lobbed insults in cat and mouse skirmishes as darkness fell. Some protesters dressed in black and hiding their faces daubed anarchist slogans on buildings, and the windows of several properties, including a Starbucks cafe, were smashed. The country's unions rallied supporters, hoping to regain momentum at a time when participation in a 36-day-long public sector strike has waned, and opinion polls show the public backing for the industrial action has dropped. The ball is in the government's camp. Either they will listen or they govern against the people's will, the CGT union boss Philippe Martinez has told reporters. Macron wants to streamline France's unwieldy pension system and provide incentives for people to stay and work longer to pay for some of the most generous retirement benefits in the industrialised world. The proposed reform would be the biggest overhaul of the system since World War II and is central to the president's drive to make the labour force more flexible and more competitive globally. Macron claims the myriad special benefits handed out to different types of workers deter mobility within the job market, especially within the public sector. If he succeeds in defeating the unions, he will strengthen his hand to embark on further pro-business reforms as he eyes re-election in 2022. Strike has hit transport in Paris the hardest, with the power sector walkouts saw electricity production fall by about 10%. Rail workers and teachers, lawyers and nurses railed against the president that they accuse of turning a deaf ear to popular feeling. Now, Day, what do you think of this? A big public sector strike in France over, well, what's already happened in the UK.
Exactly, yes. Yes.
Do you think the French are demonstrating more fervently than we
Well,
have done?
don't they always? I mean, the French are French, and that's what they do.
Well, do you think they'll succeed? That's the question. I mean, this is a
I'm not sure they will.
36-day strike that's been going on
He
a long
did
time.
back down on the fuel one. Remember?
Oh,
he,
that's
he
right.
was,
There was to be a fuel
Yes.
tax hike.
Yes, I think from memory that was the first after he was elected.
It was a
And-
huge tax hike as well. Something
Yes,
like
it
50%
was. It was.
rise
I
in
know
fuel
my own
tax.
daughter who works in France and lives in France. Even she was saying, she said, "What a stupid thing to do," because France is a rural country, and they need their fuel.
And they also, I mean, they need the public services as well, in the same way as anywhere else. If the French employees apparently receive pensions through a system divided into dozens of separate schemes.
Yeah.
Macron wants a single points-based system to treat contributions from all workers, from the public and private sectors, equally. Public sector unions have argued that this amounts to an attack on hard-earned benefits that help compensate for salaries below those in the private sector. So I remember, having also worked in the public sector myself many years ago as a union representative, that this was something we always argued, that we were paid far less than people doing an equal job in the private sector, and therefore we needed a system of...
Do you know, I remember the
incremental
exact
raising.
opposite.
Do you?
Yes, people in the private sector were having to work harder for longer to get the same kind of benefits as the public sector.
Well,
And
maybe it's balanced again, I
It's
don't know.
trying to bring it into balance. I think maybe it is more balanced in our country, but that's what he's talking about. And one of the things that my daughter did say was that he needs to learn to communicate his ideas better with the
do you
people.
think he's too aloof?
Well, I don't think he thinks he is, but you need to reach out to people to explain to them why you're doing these things, and he's clearly failed, certainly on the fuel one. And then there was something else in between. There was fuel, and then there was
Yeah, I
something
think
to do with NATO.
Well, I'm afraid I'd love to talk more about it, but we
you
have to
can't,
move
sorry.
on, I'm afraid. The next subject is Andy Whiteman, who has raised £10,000 pardon me, for a landlord legal challenge.
Yeah, good
The
for
Scottish
him.
Green MSP Andy Whiteman has successfully raised £10,000 to defend a constituent who's being evicted from the home that he has lived in for 27 years. Whiteman launched a crowdfunder before Christmas to raise the cash needed to pursue a legal case on human rights grounds to halt the eviction of 67-year-old Colin Brown, who faces eviction from his home in Leith by a corporate landlord. The £10,000 target was reached this morning. Commenting, Andy Whiteman said, "Thank you to all who have donated to this crowdfunder. Work is underway and we will report further in the coming weeks. Private tenants should not be subject to eviction simply because a corporate landlord wishes to liquidise its assets." The legal challenge to the Housing Scotland Act 1988 is based on the belief that the legislation violates Colin Brown's human rights. Under the European Convention on Human Rights, Article 8, the right to respect for private and family life, and Article 1 of Protocol 1, protection of property. So there is an MSP doing what MSPs are meant to do in helping one of his own constituents who's about to be booted out of his house
Yes.
so that somebody can sell it from under him. I'm not sure if this happens in your sphere of activity.
yes.
That are there such evictions in
Well,
the countryside
yes.
as well?
Yes. Less so now because of the Land Reform Act and work like
Well, Andy
people,
Whiteman,
people
I
like
think
Andy
he
have.
was instrumental in pushing for the Land Reform
Yes,
Act. As well.
and Leslie Riddoch as well. Not that I always agree with either of them, as you can probably expect. We've had our battles, Andy and me and Leslie. But basically what they're doing is right. It's just sometimes, I feel they maybe go too far to one direction, particularly on, do you remember the one about the cinema that wanted to, or the film studio? Yes.
Yes.
And that was a smallholder who had this ground.
And he refused to sell it. Or
He refused
something,
to. He was a tenant,
Uh-huh.
And he refused to get off.
and they couldn't make him go.
And they couldn't make him go. And I thought, well, that's interesting, because this will be the first time when it's the other way around, because it's in the
Donald
public
Trump,
interest.
if you remember as well, in
Yes.
Aberdeenshire, when he couldn't evict a certain tenant from Sand Dunes who'd lived there all his life,
Yes.
and he's still living
And
there.
he's still there.
Well, anyway, we have to carry on to our next item
Right.
here. Now, the Health Secretary confirms that the NHS clinical waste management contract, now this is one which company collapsed recently. Now, the Health Secretary, Jean Freeman, today told Parliament that the new contract for NHS clinical waste management will be fully operational from this spring. Responding to a parliamentary question from Fulton McGregor MSP, Ms Freeman said that Tredeeb Healthcare, which won a national tender last year, would take on responsibility for the NHS National Services Scotland initially on a phased basis until all necessary permit requirements are met. The full text of the parliamentary question and Ms Freeman's response is simply this, that they're asking the Scottish Government for an update, and Ms Freeman has now given that update. So this was I think, a very strange case where a company which had a big contract to dispose of clinical waste and harmful clinical waste went bust. And yet it seemed to be the only contractor to do this work.
Yeah.
You would expect there might have been others, perhaps, who could have taken up the task.
Perhaps the rules and regulations cost more than and the safety aspects of it cost more than they were being paid to dispose of the stuff.
Well, I know that the Scottish Environmental Protection Agency have very strict rules on how this kind of waste must be handled, where
As they
it's
should.
stored, how it's incinerated, what happens to the ash afterwards. And that's all very carefully regulated.
Yeah.
But one would imagine that a company with a complete monopoly on this type of waste disposal might not be the only company in waste disposal that could do it.
Yeah.
I mean, I can think of other companies like Biffa, for example, who deal with a lot of waste, might have been able to take this on.
Yes.
There were other companies who bid for the contract, and this company had won it, but it's then collapsed. So it looks now as if the Scottish Government has moved to rectify this situation before, obviously, a stockpile of this kind of waste becomes a mountain.
Yes.
Anyway, I'd like to move on a little bit now to the broadband, I believe.
Yes. I have personal experience of all of this.
Sorry,
I have personal experience of failed broadband in my area.
have they? Well, but this is broadband in Scotland, transforming digital connectivity. The Scottish Government will go beyond its commitment to provide superfast broadband to all premises across Scotland, delivering the most ambitious investment in broadband in the UK. The rollout of future-proofed full fibre broadband means that many of the premises which will benefit from the Scottish Government's Reaching 100% Broadband or R100 programme will now be able to access speeds of up to 1,000 megabits per second instead of the 30 megabits originally proposed. The Minister for Connectivity, Paul Wheelhouse, updated Parliament on the details of the contracts to deliver the R100 programme. Mr Wheelhouse said, this rollout means that Scotland will have enhanced digital connectivity years ahead of the rest of the UK. R100 will ensure that Scotland is ahead of the curve, not just in the UK, but internationally. Through our investment, we will extend full fibre broadband to much of rural Scotland, going beyond the original commitment and helping to deliver future-proofed economic, social and environmental benefits for the whole country. This is one of the most challenging broadband infrastructure builds anywhere in the world. And this, combined with the decision to future-proof our technology, means that the work will take time to complete. We're also setting up a voucher scheme, which will launch later this year. This will provide grants to broadband customers ahead of the delivery of the R100 contracts to support access to a range of technologies and suppliers. It is disappointing not to be able to announce details of the contract for the North lot due to a dispute over the awarding of the contract. Well, the Scottish Government is doing its utmost to ensure that people of the north of Scotland can access the superfast broadband through the R100 programme as soon as possible, including through our voucher scheme. So this is a very ambitious plan by the looks of this. Paul Wheelhouse, I think from the sound of it, is accepting this is going to be an immense challenge. Laying cables in the Highlands and Islands must be a terribly difficult job, especially in the weather that we have at the moment.
Yes, but there's a great deal, many other ways of accessing broadband other than through superfast cables.
Such as what?
Well,
what
you've got the satellites, yes, and there's all sorts of other ways of doing it, and they can bounce from one high building to another. I think down in England, I remember reading a while ago, they'd actually employed church steeples, church spires, so that the satellite thing can bounce,
also they're
from one
putting
to
like
the other.
microwave transmitters on church steeples.
Scotland's a bit more difficult because we've got lots of hills and
wireless
trees
internet works pretty well as long as you're fairly close to it.
Yes.
I remember the days years ago before cable became a big thing. I lived in a village at the bottom of a hill, and there was I can't remember what they called it, but there was an aerial at the top of the hill, which we were all cabled to.
Yes.
So everybody in the village got their television signal from this one single antenna, and it was, as far as I know, it was the first time I'd ever heard the term cable.
Yes, yes.
But of course now we have wireless networks, as you were saying.
Well, yes, the Wi-Fi thing. But it's all very well having these super speeds. I'd rather that we made sure that everybody had at least a speed, and we didn't have to sit there watching this circle go round and round.
I believe this is what Paul Wheelhouse is talking about, is reaching those areas which have been let down.
Yes.
And he mentioned specifically the north lot, meaning the part of Scotland to the north, where it's most difficult to get either a radio signal in or a cable in.
Yeah, because of mountains.
So it's a technical challenge.
Yes.
And I guess they're going to have to come up with new solutions for this. Maybe, as you say, a mixture.
Well, it is, yeah, because, I mean, down in Palnackie and Cockubbershire,
Yep.
the wee post office years ago decided, because they weren't getting broadband, they decided they'd pay for satellite. So there's a satellite up there somewhere, and it's beaming down whatever you call them, and they get broadband from the satellite.
They use mostly microwaves for these. They can put a tight beam so they don't waste a lot of energy broadcasting.
But in our village, we've got 12 villages in the Stirling rural southwest area, and every community council in the village has an expert, a broadband expert.
Oh, that's good.
And the council, I don't know if they're still doing it, but they did employ an expert for the whole of Stirling Council.
One of the strange things I've found, because I live in the city, obviously, and when you live in the city, you've got lots of different options for receiving Wi-Fi, and for receiving your internet connection.
Yeah.
And the cable into my house is slower than the 4G signal through my phone.
Same with
and
mine.
You think to yourself, how can the cable be slower?
Yeah.
But
Copper
it's because the cable is limited to how much it can carry,
Yes.
whereas the airwaves are not.
That's right, yes.
It may well be that the secret to wiring up the Highlands to use a combination of cable where you can and 4 or 5G where it's needed.
It's it's quite a thing, because somebody likened it to your water pipe. And if you've got a water pipe, let's say a 22 mil water pipe, and you've got 2 families on it, that's okay. But the minute you up the number of families that are doing that,
the flow rate drops
the
dramatically.
flow rate drops, and it's exactly the same with the cables.
Well, Dave, we've pretty much run out of time for this evening. I'm sorry we have. So that just remains for me to close this evening's show. And thank you, Dave, for joining us tonight and giving us your insights into today's news items. As you know, Broadcasting Scotland needs your help to continue making programmes like Scotland at 7. If you'd like to become a supporter of Scotland at 7, you can do so by following the on-screen instructions just now. Go to broadcastingscotland.scot/donate, and you can either make a donation, a one-off donation if you wish, or you can become a regular contributor at £5 a week. And you can do so just by following the link on screen. Anyway, that's about it from Scotland at 7 this evening. I'll be back again on Monday, but in the meantime, from all of us here at Broadcasting Scotland, a very good night to you.